again, like these pathways of security that puts mankind in a difficult position of steadfast observation because of too much of a heavy, concentrated pathology, if you want to call it, of, we'll say, like pathway assurances and things like that, or pathway security. They have no real zest or quality to permit, let alone commit, or furthermore, assist with the effort in which to face things with some kind of level-headed approach to all that they do. Workplace, everything, period. The term stability. How two words, security and stability, mean two totally different things, even in the rollout of the average. Security and stability are two totally different things. And like the workplace practice, you might say, as life on Earth, we're only here for like a minute. It's like infinite in its stretch and spans of the universe, or the life in which, through eternal life, even the eternal glory and the Godhead, if we say that, of our existence is kept within the parameters of a pure conscience. Security, stability mean two totally different things, and it very much does relate to the ecosystem and the way in which even education hubs and even the way in which our predominant lifestyle approaches most things with that conception rate in which puts pressure on people to substantiate any claim in which to constant the rollout through fundamental bases of assurance, but then of course those insecure and those destabilized fractions that dominate the marginal interest of, even in a world where people might like to veer and venture off into other industrial pathways. And if that's to bring about a commitment or a permittance, and of course certainly assist their greater capacity through steadfast observation to provide the means and the basis of all assurancy, that even sort of taxes people's, it charges their spirit. And people constantly look for a lesser of a charge. They look for less of a charge against their spirit, a charge against their personhood, a charge against the likeliness or the likelihood of outcomes that's born into a world that, one, relies solely on the strength of individuals to keep it together, and also relies heavily on other people, on others. Like we are born into a world, and we really do rely heavily on others as much as we rely on the sole strength of individualism to keep it intact and to keep it together. The volatility where those charges, the volatility rate of charge, would actually be seen off skew, in a sense where, just like traffic turns and traffic laws, traffic signals, traffic signs, and traffic rules, again, knows full well through a similar contrast of a constant theme, that if you just stick within the guidelines and abide by those rules, 9 times out of 10, be it possession is 9/10 of the law, even through liability claims, you'll always sort of be in the right, whether it be even a commitment to acknowledging fault in your vehicle, like a defective vehicle in which you operate, to always be told, well, it may not necessarily be you as the driver, it's always the other driver on the road that you need to be much more concerned about. That's exactly what it is when you take on board the confidence in your transportation vehicle. You could be one of those drivers. You could even be a prescribed individual through any sort of prescribed intake. And it could just simply be the level of energy and concentration that you have through those adaptive consignments in any area of life that puts into the perspective or the scope that security and stability are two totally different things. Now you look at economy. The word economy. We thrash economy like it's the number one highlighted facet in the world of governing rule and policy. I mention the word policy because, like a substantiated degree of acceleration / adrenaline, and we will get to that, some people might just put their foot down a little bit too hard. They might exceed limits. They might trip over a damn shallot and sue the supermarket. Yet asking people to do for themselves, making sure they don't exceed the speed limit or trip over a damn shallot. And through economy, these political factors is separate to also what is known as policy. You could have a governing policy like, be it ministry equals parenthood. Dogs require masters as much as children require parents or ministers or governors or educators or even disciplinary measures that don't really fortify the sequence, because like an undeveloped fear of the inevitable, the consequences always are at a sequence, like the event turning episodes into events, even the way in which we dramatize reality. Policy does that. The concept is seen that righteousness is more original than sin, to talk about authenticity versus or in opposed to generic brands, or even, let's say, authenticity versus authority. An authentic, genuine article, or an authentic product or a genuine article, in opposed to an authorized review or an authorized blah 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 blah, and it can, in a lot of cases, never be seen as the verasive conduct of anyone within those perimeters that find a self-driven enterprise like a sole dependency rate as a formal degree of individual merit-based systems recognition or personhood. So therefore adults require as much instruction, and adults require as much guidance and obedience, of course instruction and guidelines, to keep within as anything else on this earth. The governments we work with basically work sort of like in a 3-level operation, in opposed to the outside wall where it ventures off into some kind of, Irene circumstance. We've got, let's say, federal bureaucracy, which is sort of like federal policy. And then as it ventures off into the states, it's called state legislation. And then from state legislation, within its townships and its homesteads and its municipalities and its cities, it's called what's known as local jurisdiction. So like local jurisdiction or municipality, state legislation, federal policy. And like the bureaucracy, the bureau, the federal bureau, we slip into a dimension where, like we're told economy, and we thrash economy like it's the number one objective of the day. We also have what's known as ecology. And this all plays havoc, even blows out to be, let's say, bedlam theory, bedlam. Not just in industry, but every goddamn facet of reality in life with what we know as the ecosystem. Economy and ecology. They both sort of work perfectly in synchronism. There's just a sort of a tangent to it. Or there's a kind of, there's a kind of, not just requirement, but there's an obligation, two different obligations. The ecology, the economy, we'll start with economy. Economy is the engine, like the transportation module, and ecology is the interpretation. It's the terminology. And people spend more time thrashing economy than what they do superficially, in a lot of respect, guarding law-abiding / concrete strength of law terminology, lawful terminology. The ecological standards of practice seen at every level and corporate head or departmental head, departmental figure and societal someone in this world that that compromises those marginal interests. It compromises our ability to see fit substantiated in every area of concrete society as a consummated detail in which to keep consistent with that basis, like the conformity. Let's say, like the security, but of course always like the stability. Anything that takes away the greater dependence on oneself is called corruption, like a corrupted data file, like a corrupted file cabinet, like a corrupted piece of anything, like peace, Irene, whatever, right? It corrupts it. And you wonder where to fix it. People act always like there is, not to mention acting careers, people act as if things need to be fixed, but if it wasn't broken, it surely can't be fixed, and if it was broken, then it really broken, then it surely can't be fixed. There is a level of maintenance and upkeep that brings into the arena the prospective realm that security and stability mean two totally different things. Acceleration first, adrenaline. Attitude determines altitude, or attitude determines altitude. Even the way in which we propose our accent or our affluence, in which through applied sciences provides it in an improvisation, readily accessible, so that just like traffic rules, just like people, it dominates those margins to give people a more reverent fear and understanding, providing greater security for them. The stability factor always is at rest with the individual through pliable conduct, through viable economic traits of concern, like concentration, that takes things as a given, just like the sales perspective of trade, bargaining, conversion, legitimate exchange, choice to choose whether you want to purchase something or take it or leave it or move on and just validate the circumstance in which sees your feet govern its path. Say possession is 9/10 of the law. A lot of the times you don't want what people have for you. Money is the only legitimate document of exchange or legitimate exchange document in the whole wide world. That's why Europeans, through the European dollar, the euro currency, is in fact the most exchangeable currency document of currency in the whole wide world. Like proximity, like the way in which you might want to go to Europe or go back to Europe or pass through Europe and travel out there into the world. To keep it through a regulatory period that probably doesn't sustain the level of personal interest that they have to domineering factors, give it the nationality, that they've converged it all into a European immunity. Told us it was never going to have a problem with individual countries subsequent of World War II, if like even after Britain unselfishly inject their power into the EU to help stabilise them through commerce, commerce, you know? I'll just leave it at that. I'm not even going to go, right? So like, again, acceleration and adrenaline. Why is it that people fail to understand conversion, like conversationalism, like being able to converse openly and freely, or what it is to be able to give people the directive, serve the public trust, do the best at what you've got with yourself, and the way in which those marginals, the marginal degree of insight carries itself from one point to the next, or all day, every day, day in, week out, month in, year out, decade in, century out, is a sole dependency or is dependent on oneself. If you're not good to yourself, or if you don't look after yourself, they say that you're no good to anyone. But that's most importantly what it means anyway. So therefore, like economy versus ecology, the ecosystem, this planet, the environment, always suffers because we have what's known as some kind of a retrospective fear. And if it's because simply people don't understand certain terminology or reverent information because we fail to retain it for some good use or purpose, we're born into a world that relies so heavily on others. So why sort of take the whole kit, can and caboodle, the whole environment, ecosystem, and every economical challenge at the helm of Ecological, or that balancing act, right, of life, for some kind of personal / vain interpretation that even wishes to inject it into the way in which into the outside world, the transitory fashion and the transitory standard of the outside world, even the traffic laws and the way in which we get on that highway and appropriate our personhood and our likelihood and everything that like that balancing act holds itself like what we call the temple. We actually are the temple. Acceleration, adrenaline, policy, legislation, jurisdiction. There's only so much that the federal administration, like policy, can. That's why they call it policy. Then you got legislation, state legislation. Legislation compromises federal law or concrete law and order. Individuals just step over the border and it becomes another jurisdiction's incident in which to address. And like local jurisdiction, this is where most of the battlegrounds of people's ability in which to differentiate between lopsided affairs, lifestyles via choice, or the way in which industry tackles this or allows economy to play more of have more of an impact on a zone than what, let's say, the way in which people do for their country what their country can't do for them. Or what it is to just fervently understand in a lot of areas. You know, the simplicity to what really economy is about. Economy is actually a private, it's a private, personal, confidential thing, isn't it? It's not something you exploit or distribute or perpetrate. We have children that are literally forced to, by law, to go to school at the age of 5 years old. These days it's called prep school. It was like, preschool, like kindergarten. And then from kindergarten, preschool, and then grade 1, or the first grade, they're required to, let's say, perfectly fulfill 12 years of education to grade 12. People say, great. But why do you give up on grade 12? Why do you give up at grade 12? Furthermore, why aren't more young people graduating before grade 12? Graduating secondary college? Why? Because you don't design the school that way. You don't design society that way. The transitory world and the transitory thinking which spells out the way in which households govern themselves, the way in which households minister to themselves, the same way in which you slow down and retardate the processes, just like the acceleration rate and the adrenaline in which to keep at pace with, like the capacity, the steadfast observations that are seen so very clear through statistic and information / terminology. Like the kinds of transitory conversations or fields, transitory fields of circuitry conversation, circuitry conduct, in which sort of plays volatile like a hovercraft over those statistics, over the real world. And in some cases that might be illustrated as people who live in an air-conditioned life, from an air-conditioned household to an air-conditioned car, on the way to the air-conditioned building, and the air-conditioned people's mouths and nose and crotch or something, which they probably never noticed. Then back from that to the goddamn air-conditioned car, back to the air-conditioned home. There's no reason why children could not graduate all secondary college by, let's say, even by the end of primary school, or grade 8 and 9. Probably a good, like by grade 10, basically. There could be an area where children most definitely, because of more of a physical application and practicality to the real world we live in, sort of graduate theoretical knowledge or aptitude, let's say. I didn't say altitude or attitude, I said aptitude. But yet we've got young teenagers, like 17 years old, that are forced to be kicked out of school, institutional education, and they haven't graduated quite to a standard in which the schema itself, or the absolute, the law required those kids to be in school from grade 1. If young people have to face grade 1 with a certain intellectual capacity, intelligence, that's put on a score sheet, like their mental age, weighed up against their actual real age, and everything sort of, their age just frozen at 15, no matter what, then if they're grade 12 and they haven't accelerated, let's say 40 or 50 intelligence quotient, like IQ points, if children do not exceed or greater than an IQ result of 115 or 120, probably a fairer margin, by the time they're finished grade 12, then you need to keep young people in school and reinvent things like grade 13, grade 14, grade 15. None of this boot camp crap after you finish school in grade 12. You need to keep them in institutions like school, like you all designed it from a very young age, until you get those results. Otherwise, you expect the system to work a lot harder, like, let's say, confiscation of your children and filling their adrenaline in those schools, that just abandons them like they did sort of when they took away your child at 5, 6 years old and made you go work for the man and separate even the confidence or the confined, and the privacy of a qualitative life with your partner and family. That your boss actually treats you worse and even demands more of you than what your partner does. It takes all the light out of your day, takes all the spark out of the day, like the sun above your head. By the time you come home to even start, you might be exhausted. It's taxing. You might be tired. Your boss really only gives you anything that you really choose to share with anyone. You just blame it on money or something. And the spark's gone. And you start to think about what it is to have quality time with that in which is your most precious creation, your precious commodity, your flesh and blood. And then you say it's not working. What do we have to do to make this work? Otherwise, I'm thinking about other outcomes. I'm thinking about something different in life. What do we have to do to make quality time? I feel like I'm coming second to you, you might say, because your boss demands more of you. Your boss treats you a hell of a lot worse. Like the bank does the same thing too. The bank demands so much of you, and it's like being in bed with the bank, and it's like being in bed with your boss. And not you being the boss of your family, and you doing everything you can to invest in the fast-tracked adrenaline or competency, the draftsman's competency or the draft competency of all creation and all upkeep and maintenance. You take it away. You got to keep kids in school, they're just teenagers, mind you. This is why I don't want to see any goddamn 16-year-old child pregnant and knocked up with babies. If they're only at school, then if somebody's dick sort of falls out of their pants and into her lap and she gets pregnant, you have to go to court and start treating it like a crime. If you only knew what it was for some parents to put all the investment they could to stick into the system, the viable systems trait of all government and concrete law, to allow simple areas like that to slip up and destroy a family's outlook, which the parents would have never wanted, the aunties, the uncles. No one would have wanted that for their 16, 17-year-old precious someone, let alone 19, 20, 21. You just send them to school to get pregnant at so young, or you've made the law at 16 for them to have sex because somebody goes after them, and you say there was nothing you could do about it. You know what you can do? You can simply take them to court. Any young person. Unless you have a contract, or you have registered that child before you went ahead and invented it or created it. That's what liability is. That's what it is for governments to understand the waged circumstance of tax revenue that allocates social security welfare funding to any new recipient applying for dole money. The government's always the last to know. They only really know when a new child's coming into the country, like migration, like smuggling, like a baby, once that baby's born. And only does the government get a registry, and then the government's forced to come up with last-minute money to the tune of single, parent pension for the child. Money, extra money out of nowhere. The government and the world needs to recognise life while it is in the womb. And that's what it is to understand everything that is the temple. Everything this consummated world in which we fight life and limb for. Like the way in which we maintain and upkeep our personhood, our security, and the stabilising factors that keep it all secure. Not using legislation to compromise the law. It becomes a patchwork exemplary always, and these shoots of water just pissing out of a goddamn concrete law that you thought was, you turned it rubbery like a waterbed. All these goddamn spurts come up, but there's more water coming up all the time. It's like an ocean that never quits. And you ain't got enough hands to bloody patch these things, even with legislative operators or the system itself, let alone brand new politicians, or the way in which the world is getting better and stronger through service retention, just based on the proprietary factors and standards of all the community in the world that we're educating and building, to the point where it becomes so volatile underneath you, the whole thing just explodes because you've compromised it. With every patch you've sort of have compromised it. You talk about positive reinforcement, which in a lot of cases you've done everything you can, but when it's broken, if it is sort of punctured, then you wonder what motivation is, or simple motive. You wouldn't have enough hands to fill those patches in that legislation is compromised, to play a game of Twister with 4 people on a Twister board game. Like your swingers club, factions within a faction. Factions actually exist within factions. Not just a faction as a whole. I don't want to see young people knocked up, do you? You send them to school to do what? Not graduate and throw their whole fucking life away. Does it look more... What does that look like? A 16, 17-year-old. Is that what they went to school for? That there was not a minister in sight? There wasn't a state operator? There wasn't anyone in sight to prevent it? Not a fucking thing in the world. This is what we call the battleground. The ages of 16 to 25. Where all the last minute, all the positive reinforcement of young people to get them so fit that their life sort of starts at 26. Because 26 is what's called a generation. 26 years is a generation. The code in which I've put together to understand a lot of this, it's like a golden ratio, and it absolutely is the golden ratio. is that 26 is a 12 to be 52 and a 14 deficit. That's basically life and limb on this earth. And 5 itself be it the new 41, which is like 14 the deficit. 52 years with like a 14 to it. 52 years with 41 applied to it. And a 5. If it all sort of keeps, and there's this volatile, it always shakes the numbers, the hundreds and everything is sort of like, it's not concrete, it sort of just boxes everything in and we unfold from there. Mathematics unfolds. But like 26 years as a generation, 26 is a 12 because even for a young woman, a young lady, when they're 12, that's usually where the puberty starts. So when you've come through puberty, you've only just sort of started. You've got double to go. Now that you've got puberty, you have to wait a complete double of that time it took until you're ready to have children, until your physical body. It took 12 years or 13 years to get there. Now you got to take another, build from there a further extension, and then you can have children, which is really good age around 26 or beyond. And during that time, you can learn to stand on your own 2 feet, see the world, build yourself up some capital, some experience, get some capital behind you, see the world, understand how to stand on your own 2 feet, live within your skin, understand your parameters, have far greater consequences and experiences which grow out to be the very graduation. And the development and the designation from what it is to take your fucking life seriously and not give it up. Don't give up on yourself. The whole system is compromised, it gives up on you. And like the ecosystem and the whole world in print, what do you think that it requires? Everything requires the ability in which to identify needs and meet needs. It's really not that difficult. It's pliable conduct. It's the way in which you only expect it. Carnality. Carnal-mindedness is enmity towards God. Carnality, carnal knowledge, carnal thinkers. Infantile operators of education and the transitory world in which provide the fieldwork of recognition and the industrial pathways for all citizens, which get weighed up against the economical balancing act of governance and statewide security. Of what people sort of go after, but at the same time retain. And you talk about opportunity. Look, opportunity is exactly that reminder. Opportunity is exactly the reminder. Opportunity. Like deportmentalism. Deportmentalization. Like the environment, like the ecosystem, everything we transport through import and export markets, through migration and immigration and emigration patterns, through what it is to basically sort of portal by example. Why is it that when you have lunch at school, you got to guard your children with a supervisor, a teacher? Some classes have 20, 25 children in a classroom. It's an enormous job. It's greater than parenthood in a lot of ways. When you got a house that big, you don't even have much room to conduct children in an open space. To that number and that effect. When they're having lunch, you send them outside with all the freaking kids, the scallywags. And they go out there with 900 and 1,000 other kids. They steal each other's lunches. You're not even supervising kids. Now, why is it that they got to sit there in a desk, all strapped into a chair, and watch you dictate the blackboard and stare at that blackboard and consume it But when it comes to lunch, doesn't it seem better that you all sit at the table in your like at home? You go to the table and eat from the table. Then why aren't you, as a supervising teacher or a faculty, making people eat their lunch in class? You all sit down, the teacher can actually eat lunch too in the class, and there can be supervision of children eating in class like it's one of the 3 greatest things they've got to do all day. What the parents require those children to do. Where did you get it so wrong in the sands of time? To ill-direct your means and what you invest in as parents. From grade 1 to grade 12, there is 21,000 hours of private paid-for intuition, and nobody was really supervising them. There was no real mannerhood. There was no real politeness and courtesy. There was no privacy and confidence instilled in a lot of children because of bullying factors. And you know how jealous and envious kids are? They might see people with kinds of lunch. They might see people with certain clothes. They might see other kids. And they mightn't even have any lunch. So therefore, there's a consultancy in which the school has to be able, has to understand that parents need to provide for their children as much as the school needs to provide for those children. Having your lunch in class and supervising those children whilst they eat, and then the teacher doesn't have to have a reason to go duck into the staff room and associate with adults and have a private fag. When those children, your 25 kids that you're responsible for in your class, go out there into the schoolyard, you have to follow them. You have to be there all day, and you have to never let children go. And that goes for all faculty staff in a school. When those children spell out to be 900 students in a schoolyard, every teacher needs to follow them out there, and none of this ducking to the teacher's room, ringing up your mechanic. When's my car ready? Ringing up your insurance company. Has this changed? Where the fuck you been? Where the fuck you at? What the fuck are you doing? How the fuck did this happen? And then you see children governing themselves through only that in which, like the dispelled use of terms and agreement, which the parents didn't pick up on because you took those kids and threw them into the education institution. They sexualize, they bully, they harass. They're smoking cigarettes. They're wagging school. They're walking out of the goddamn grounds. The department doesn't know how to look at it like not even a teacher can grab a child and stop them from walking out, a lot of cases. And that's called harassment or sexuality or something. Physical, whatever. There's so many. You are responsible for all those 25 children. Every goddamn member of the school faculty, the staff and faculty administration needs to be out there. The perimeters of the school is a lot difficult to contain than just a classroom. Then I beg to ask you, why have you done that? Because of economy. You aren't asked to rule the world and the whole nation when you do your job. You are supposed to just do your job and govern your workplace practice or your enrolled use of terminology, termed enrollment. You just have to do your job. The book of 1 Thessalonians says, and I quote, "What is the will of God? The will of God is your sanctification." Your sanctification. Furthermore, like what you require of each other in the house and the outside world, and especially the workplace practice in the entire world, like the streets, to abstain from all sexual immorality. Bringing equality, bridging equality between both boys and girls, men and women, to not ever use sexual immorality as a form of even private gratuity. Even at lunchtime, and you wonder why you've pissed off to the staff room. You wonder why even at the workplace. At lunch, I use gathering to find a way to make your boss become more profitable, and find a way for the boss to, so that you can all have greater than 4 weeks off at the end of the year. You can actually end the year in October and not wait to December, because you've found a way to sort of fast track the productivity and expel all those backlog issues or the logbook issues. It goes on to say in the book of Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians, I think it's chapter 4, and furthermore to take control of your own vessel. So the will of God is your sanctification. It is to consummate everything in which you have fought for or applied for or redeemed, that you redeem. It is to abstain from all sexual immorality as if it has no place, period. How can that have anything to do with your workplace or your work practice? It doesn't. How the fuck does that relate to children? And to take control of your own vessel, which is like the engine, like the institution. And when there's issues, you just simply have to spend a lot time longer. A mechanic, we fight this world for mechanics. Mechanics are like the lifeblood in a lot of cases, where they pay tax to the government and they fix people's cars. Because cars break down. The car industry, those mechanics have to be up to their eyeballs and their elbows and eyeballs in grease and oil and shit and everything. They barely get a break. And a lot of cases, mechanics work 6 days a week and sometimes 7 days a week. They have to work overtime. Like children need to be in school in grade 13, 14, 15 if the mechanic or the technician says you haven't graduated. It wasn't just kept within a grade, ended at grade 12 because the government or the system or private institutions were just thieving revenue or families and doing nothing as a result. The system just thieves money or families and makes them invest in false security. Right? And so therefore, mechanics do overtime. Life isn't about being behind the 8 ball. Things do break. People do need help. People need advice. We rely heavily on others. We have specialist services. We have all these things sort of rolled into one. Because we may have chosen a different pathway to accelerate our future. But life is very much about being ahead of time and ahead of the dollar. So that when we justify our logbooks or we understand how to pick up the pace, we won't have a backlog of work to do next week. Even company owners or sole contractors know that when they're painting a house under contract, they want to finish it early rather than just every goddamn day within their quote. Like Jesus, through his understanding of what Joseph taught him through carpentry, understanding perfect measure and quote. You give people a perfect measure and quote. You give me your child, I will turn them into this. It's like a sensei, like a science teacher, martial science teacher. If you just stick within the guidelines and the obediences and the instructions, it will produce those results. Life is not about being behind the 8 ball or using accessory as a shield. Like your workplace practice that says, I work, I don't have the time, money, energy, resources, manpower, or intelligence to commit crimes. What's that? People that pay tax to the government don't have the ability to commit crimes? You just took the sun from out of their equation on the weekdays, and they didn't have the physical strength and upkeep and resources like dangerous weapons, cars, anything, to commit crimes and to have a brain to boot. People think that if they work, that's it, but they just want it to work anyway. They will slave people. They'll slave people for money just to make it work. Because by the time you're finished work, you probably don't even want to go back to work. That's why you go to sleep. Or what it is to sort of never graduate. You will end the day on a Friday and try to get out of work at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon to make it at the pub by 5 o'clock with your mates. And you will drink or something over the weekend, happy-go-lucky, piss it up in a canter not really a Davenport exercise at home doing hokey pokey with your missus and kids. But by the time Monday comes along, you might have had second thoughts about wanting to go back to work, rather than using all the workplace experience, all your work experience during the week, to start Monday afresh and be up and at it, rise and shine, just jump straight into it and promote, be right on the front foot. You call that Monday-itis. And then some people, the working week for a lot of companies, and a hell of a lot of companies, doesn't actually kick in until Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday. And why is that? Because, alcohol stays in your systems for 3 days, but so does the fucking weekend.